Hi, my name is Graham Smith, and I'm one of the authors that helped develop the learning approach to mathematics that is found in our textbook as well as the video you are about to experience. To learn more about our approach to learning mathematics, visit the web address that accompanies this video. Now, enjoy the video. Multiplying and dividing signed numbers. This video will help you multiply and divide two signed numbers, multiply and divide several signed numbers, and evaluate an exponential expression involving signed numbers. Multiply and divide two signed numbers. To multiply or divide two signed numbers, use these simple rules to determine the sign of the answer. If we have opposite signs, we're going to get a negative answer. So if we have one positive and one negative, or one positive times one negative, we're going to get a negative answer. Or if we had one negative times one positive or divided by one positive, we're going to get a negative answer. So opposite signs or different signs, negative answer. Same signs, positive answer. Well, we already know this one, that if we take a positive number times a positive number, we're going to get a positive answer. Now, this one is a little bit confusing, but as long as you remember our rule, same signs, positive, you'll get this right. If I have a negative times a negative or a negative divided by a negative, I'm also going to get a positive answer. Well, you may have wondered to yourself, how do we end up with these sign rules that different signs give us a negative answer? Let's take a look at why it works. To understand why factors with opposite signs result in a negative product, study the following pattern. Okay? And so we have this pattern here where I'm going to keep decreasing this red number here, the first number, by 1. And so moving down this left side, I start with 2, 1, 0, and then decreasing 1 again, I get negative 1, negative 2. Okay? Now let's see what happens when I get my answers going down the right side. So starting with 2 times 4, I get an answer of 8. Now if I decrease that by 1 and I have 1 times 4, I get 4. And now if I take 0 times 4, I get 0. These are multiplication problems that you're used to seeing the answer to. Well, let's take a look at what's going on this right side. Every time I drop the left side by 1, my answer decreases by 4. So I started out with 8, then I got 4, then I got 0. Well, this pattern is going to have to continue. So now if I decrease the left side by 1 and go from 0 to negative 1, this answer over here of 0 has to decrease 4 again. That gives me negative 4. And now if I decrease by 1 again, I get to negative 2. Now I get negative 8. And you can see what's happening down here. When I have a negative 1 times a positive 4, I get negative 4. And when I have a negative 2 times a positive 4, I get a negative 8. So opposite signs end up in a negative answer. So looking at those sign rules for multiplication and division, you might have wondered how a negative times a negative can end up being a positive. So let's take a look at why it works. To understand why factors with negative signs result in a positive product, study the following pattern. And in this pattern here, moving down the left side, the first factor, the red factor, keeps decreasing by 1. So if we go down this column here, you can see that first factor keeps decreasing by 1. We have 2, 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2. Okay? Now, moving down the right side, the product keeps increasing by 4. So notice if I take a positive 2 times a negative 4, that gives me negative 8. Now if I take a positive 1 times a negative 4, that gives me a negative 4. And you can see that between negative 8 to negative 4, that product is increasing by 4. So we're going to follow that pattern again. So 0 times negative 4, that's going to increase 4. So from negative 4 to 0 is an increase of 4. And now we're going to decrease this red factor, and that means this right side's got to increase. So a negative 1 times a negative 4 actually gives me now a positive 4. And then a negative 2 times a negative 4 actually gives me a positive 8. Now let's take a look at some examples that will help you understand how to multiply and divide signed numbers. Example 1. We're asked to multiply a positive 6 times a negative 5. Well, I think the first thing to do is to decide what the sign is going to be, then we'll go to do the multiplication. So notice I have opposite signs here, a positive and a negative. That means I'm going to get a negative answer. Now I'll go ahead and do the multiplication. 6 times 5 is 30. So I get an answer of negative 30. Example 2. We're asked to divide a negative 16 by a negative 2. And again, we'll start by identifying the sign. Notice the signs are the same, both negative. That's going to give us a positive answer. So I'm going to get a positive answer, and then I would say 16 divided by 2 is 8. So I get an answer of positive 8. Example 3, we're asked to multiply these fractions together. Well, first let's take a look at what the sign is going to be. I have a negative 3/4 times a negative 8/9. Well, those signs are the same, so that's going to give me a positive answer. Now that I've taken care of the sign and the product, let's go ahead and factor these out and get a nice simplified answer. So I'll write out my big fraction bar here, and I'll factor across the numerators. So 3 is prime. 8 is 2 times 2 times 2. Going across the denominators, 4, 2 times 2, and then when I factor 9, I'll get 3 times 3. Let's see, divide out our common factors. Common factor of 2, and another common factor of 3, so I end up with an answer of positive 2/3. Now it's time to check your understanding of multiplying and dividing signed numbers. Pause your video player and answer these guided practice questions. When you're done, hit play to see how you did. Question 1. We're asked to multiply a negative 7 times a negative 8. Let's start with a sign. Both of the signs are the same. That's going to give me a positive answer. Now we go to the multiplication. 7 times 8 is 56, so we get an answer of positive 56. Question 2. We're asked to divide a negative 10 divided by a positive 5. Let's start with a sign. These signs are opposites. One is negative, one is positive. That's going to give us a negative answer. Now let's go to the division. 10 divided by 5 is 2, so we get an answer of negative 2. Question 3, we're asked to divide with these fractions. Again, let's start first with the sign of our answer. Notice I have a negative times a positive. The signs are opposites or different, so that's going to give me a negative answer. Now I need to multiply or turn this division problem into a multiplication problem. So I know I'm going to get a negative answer. So I'm going to write that down. So I'll have 1/3 times, and I take the reciprocal of the second fraction, times 9/1. Now before I multiply, let's factor this out. I know I'm getting a negative answer here, so I'll put the negative out front. Big fraction bar. Going across the numerator, I have 1, and when I factor 9, I get 3 times 3. Going across the denominators, 3 is prime and also 1 is prime. So let's take a look. Dividing out our common factors of 3 and 3. The ones, they can stay right where they are. So basically what I get here is I'll get negative answer, but I'll get negative 3/1. And now I can simplify that to a whole number. Negative 3/1 is just negative 3. Multiply and divide several signed numbers. When we multiply and divide several signed numbers, a lot of times it's going to be hard to keep track of the sign, or it's easy to make a mistake with the signs. So we can use two simple rules that will help us get the sign of our answer correct. The first rule is this: that if we have an even number of negatives in the problem, it's going to give us a positive answer. So taking a look here, I have 2 negatives in this problem. I'm multiplying and then dividing, but I have 2 negatives. 1, 2 negatives. That tells me in the end that I'm going to get a positive answer. So after I get done working this problem, I would check to make sure that I had a positive answer. Over here, I have 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. That is also going to give me a positive answer. So when I got done working out this multiplication and division, I would check to make sure that my answer was positive. The second rule kind of follows up to this one, and that is this: if I have an odd number of negatives, I'm going to get a negative answer. So here, in this first one, I just have 1 negative. So when I got done doing the multiplication and division, I better have a negative answer. Here there are 3, 1, 2, 3. So again, when I got done doing this multiplication and division, I would check to make sure that I had a negative answer. Here's how this works. Basically, every time I take a pair of negatives and put them together, so for example up here in this problem, if I take this negative 2 and this negative 5, when I pair those up, that's going to give me a positive answer. And if you have an even number of negatives, all the negatives pair up and kind of cancel each other out and end up being positive. So that's why when we have an even number of negatives, we get a positive answer. Now, with an odd number of negatives, basically what happens, and if we look down here, we get everything to pair up except for 1. So here I'd have these negative 1 and this negative 3 coming together to make a positive answer. And then we'd have just 1 negative left over. So what we get really is we get all of these negatives to pair up, which gives us a positive answer. And then finally the last thing is we have this 1 negative left over, which then turns the answer into a negative answer. Now let's take a look at an example that will help you understand how to multiply and divide several signed numbers. Example 4. We're asked to evaluate this expression and we have multiplication and division in there. Let's kind of take a look first at how many negatives we have. We have 1, 2 negatives. We know then that's an even number, so we're going to get a positive answer. So I'm going to write that down over here. If we get done working this problem, we better end up with a positive answer. Okay, now let's take a look at doing the problem. With multiplication and division, I want to follow the order of operations, which means I want to work left to right. So the first thing I would do is I would take this negative 3 times this negative 5. That's going to give me a positive 15. Now I'm going to rewrite the rest of the problem. So I have times 2 and then divided by 6. Now I'm going to keep working left to right. 15 times 2 is 30. And then 30 divided by 6 gives me 5, and that's a positive 5. And I check back over here, and sure enough, I was supposed to get a positive answer, so I'm confident in that answer. Now it's time to check your understanding of multiplying and dividing several signed numbers. Pause your video player and answer this guided practice question. When you're done, hit play to see how you did. Question 4. We're asked to evaluate this expression. Before we do that, let's start and figure out what the sign of this answer is going to be. Notice I have 1, 2, 3 negatives. That's an odd number, so I better get a negative answer when I get done here. Now that I've got that established, let's go ahead and work this out. So following the order of operations with multiplication and division, we're working left to right. 6 divided by a negative 2. Those are opposite signs, so that is going to give me a negative 3 for my answer. Let's rewrite the rest of the problem. Okay? Again, working left to right. Now I have a negative 3 times a negative 8. Those are the same kinds of signs. So that's going to give me a positive answer, and that's going to give me a positive 24. The last step now, I'm going to take a positive 24 divided by a negative 4. Those are different signs, so that is going to give me a negative answer. And let's see, positive 24 divided by 4 is going to give me 6. So I get an answer of negative 6. That matches with what I thought the sign on the answer should be, so I'm confident in the sign on this answer. Evaluate an exponential expression involving signed numbers. Let's start with a definition. The base is the symbol that appears immediately before the exponent. For example, in our example here, the exponent touches the grouping. So the exponent 3 and the base is the whole thing of negative 4. So taking a look down here at this all together, the black part here is the base. So both the negative and the 4 is getting taken to this third power, which is our exponent. When evaluating exponents, it is important to identify when the base is positive or when the base is negative. In our first example here, the base is actually negative 3. So if I take a look, if I put parentheses around both the negative and the 3, that means both the negative and the 3 are getting taken to the second power. So I want to take the whole thing, negative 3, times itself. And when I take a negative 3 times a negative 3, I have same signs, so that is going to give me a positive answer of 9. Here is a very similar example where we end up with a negative answer. Here the base is just 3. Notice I don't have parentheses around the negative 3. That means 3 is the only thing that's getting taken to this power of 2, not the negative. So basically what this looks like, so we take this negative and we put it out front, and we are now just taking 3 times 3. That's what the exponent went with. And now 3 times 3 gives us 9. Now we would take the opposite of 9, or positive 9, which would give us an answer then of negative 9. So notice these problems started out very similar in the way that they looked. But in one case, the negative was included in what we were taking to the power, so we ended up with a positive 9. In the next case, the negative was not included in the exponent of what we were taking to that exponent of 2, so we ended up with an answer of negative 9. Now let's take a look at some examples that will help you understand how to evaluate exponents with signed numbers. Example 5. We're asked to evaluate, in this case, negative 5 to the second power. Notice the parentheses around both the negative and the 5 mean we need to take the whole thing, negative 5, times itself. Well, a negative 5 times a negative 5 is going to give us a positive 25. Example 6, we're asked to evaluate, in this case, just the exponent, just 5 has the exponent. So we would say the negative sign goes out front, just the 5 was being taken to that second power, so we need to multiply 5 times 5, which gives us 25. Now we'll deal with that opposite or negative sign so that we get an answer then of negative 25. Now it's time to check your understanding of evaluating exponents on signed numbers. Pause your video player and answer these guided practice questions. When you're done, hit play to see how you did. Question 5. We're asked to evaluate this expression. Well, only the 10 is getting taken to the second power, so the negative sign goes out front. The 10 was what we need to multiply by itself. So 10 times 10 is 100. When we take the opposite of that, we get negative 100. Example 6, we're asked to evaluate this expression where both the 10 and the negative are getting taken to that second power. So I get negative 10 times negative 10. Same signs, and negative times a negative is going to give us a positive answer. 10 times 10 is 100, so we get positive 100. If you found this video helpful, I encourage you to check out our other videos that we have on YouTube, or visit the web address that accompanies this video to learn more about our approach to learning mathematics.